Here a little bit less formal looking. Ah, it's the curse of the uneven ground. Welcome to Back Alley Bonsai. Today, what I thought I would do is I decided to run an informal poll on Facebook because I've had a lot of folks reach out and ask me questions about their plants, about bonsai in general, about specific bonsai and techniques and what tools do they need and stuff like that. And so I figured, you know what, I'm just going to ask my friends and on social media and see if there's anything that they'd like to see. Again, it's kind of a slowdown period. I don't have any really exciting bonsai work to do right this second, so I figured I would take a second and answer some questions. And the camera's a little crooked because back here in the alley is a little bit of a slope, and if I was more professional I would level out the tripod, but I'm not, so you're stuck with this. So the question that came up a couple of times, and I think this is a great question to ask because it comes up for everybody who owns plants at some point or another, whether it be trees or shrubs or house plants, and that is, why are the leaves on my plant turning brown? And sometimes there's easy reasons and sometimes there's hard reasons. Sometimes they're normal and sometimes it's abnormal. And it all kind of depends on what's going on. And one of the things about plants in general is that they can't just tell us what's wrong. It's like dealing with a sick animal. Your dog, in fact, your dog is actually more likely to let you know that there's a problem. It's gonna let you know it doesn't feel good, even if it doesn't tell you exactly what doesn't feel good. Plants don't have any way to tell us. They just get sick and then they start showing us some signs, and sometimes it's 2 weeks after the problem started and it may already be close to too late to actually do anything about it by the time we find out. So diagnosing browning leaves can be tricky. It's not like insects or something, or caterpillars chewing on your leaves. Like, you can spot that right away. Browning leaves can be a trickier problem. And broadly speaking, what browning leaves tells us is that there's some sort of imbalance going on. There's some sort of imbalance between the roots trying to provide water to the leaves and the plant's ability to sustain those leaves. There's something going on there, and it could be totally normal and natural and just part of the plant's life cycle, or it could indicate a bigger problem. If you have a shrub or an evergreen type of plant or something like that, it could be totally normal to have some brown leaves on it. I'll give you an example here. So this is a California coast live oak. These are actually evergreen trees. They don't really, they always stay green throughout the year. They don't drop leaves like deciduous trees do, but they do get these brown leaves. And you'll see some of these leaves on here are half brown and half green. And this is actually pretty normal for this type of tree. Leaves are an investment for plants, and they have diminishing returns. As the leaves start to get older, they get less and less efficient, and the plant doesn't really want to spend a bunch of time on that. So you can imagine this tree with bigger branches and being bushier. Some of these lower leaves that are all the way down here in this pot are going to start getting shaded out. Those leaves don't do the plant any good to try and sustain them anymore. So it's going to pull the chlorophyll out, it's going to stop sustaining water to them, and it's basically just going to let them go. That's pretty normal for these kinds of trees. So it requires some knowledge about the kind of plant that you're dealing with. So that is not uncommon. Another example of a similar situation is this really sad looking hawthorn, and you may think at first blush, oh, this plant is dead. I can assure you this is not. It should not have all these brown leaves, but it is in shock. It is recovering from a repotting. It came in the same pot as a much bigger plant, and I managed to save enough root that it's still alive, but it was unable, with the amount of root and stress it has sustained, to basically maintain the leaf structure. But we can do the old thumbnail test on this thing and go to the highest middle branch or a stem right there, and we can see a little bit of green right there underneath. So we can get that back there underneath the trunk. and that tells me that there is still it's still photosynthesizing underneath the bark. It will still continue to photosynthesize. There's still some little green nubbins at the base of some of these leaves. It's still doing its best. It's trying to process sugars and make better roots, so that it can survive. And then we'll have at kind of the other end of like the next level here, we'll have something like this apple over here. And this is an apple tree that I grew from leaf, or from seed, excuse me. And you see it's a really healthy apple tree. But the thing about apples is that in Los Angeles, it doesn't really get cold. And so the autumn time when these, and winter when these trees would normally drop their leaves, they just don't. And so the tree kind of holds on to them. And again, you can see these really speckly leaves in here where it tried to kind of like figure out what to do with them, and it was never really, its instinct was to drop them, but it never really got cold enough to finish the process. It only got halfway through it. And so I kind of went through and did I pruned off about a third of the leaves. The leaves are actually all the way down here, and I pruned off about a third of them and clipped some of them back, and within a week all of this new growth just shot right out. And this is all really healthy for this tree. This is exactly what I wanted to see on it. And it's looking really, really good. Sorry, I thought I saw an aphid on there. So that's sometimes what you have to do with trees that you would normally think of as being your annual deciduous, drop your leaves kinds of trees, depending on your climate. So that's just what happens in Los Angeles with these particular trees. Another common problem that you will see is a tree that simply overestimates its ability. I would call it a precocious tree, where it just produces more greenery than it can actually sustain with its root structure. I'll give you an example here. This is my Meyer Lemon. This is one that I've had for a couple of years. This one actually got attacked really badly by rats last year. And so the root structure was still really good on it, but it basically decided to overcompensate this year and throw out a bunch of new growth. And it's got some old growth. That's what these older, browner leaves back here are. But it threw out actually more leaves than it can actually sustain this year. And so what I wound up having to do, what it started to do, was the roots could not sustain the leaves as they were. And so it started to pull back some of the water, move the water more evenly. No amount of watering was going to make up for the difference, and it started to let some of these leaves die. And when that happens, what you can do is you can actually cut some of those leaves back to help get you a broader leaf structure, and that can help get your leaves to green back up again, and get the tree back into balance, back into what we call homeostasis, where the roots and the leaves are in synergy with each other and supporting one another effectively. The leaves are sending sugars down to the roots, and the roots are sending water and nutrients back up to the leaves. So those are all relatively normal kinds of things. The real question comes, and they just kind of take time and a little bit of maintenance, pruning, and maybe some clip back. Maybe you got too many leaves, you cut a couple of them off, and the plant sort of recovers from there. And then we get to some other really odd situations which are worth keeping an eye or taking a look at. One of them is underwatering, and I don't really have a good example of a plant that's been underwatered. Now, obviously, if a plant that doesn't have enough water, it's not going to be able to get water to the leaves. The leaves are going to oftentimes get very droopy. They don't always get droopy. It depends on the type of plant. But they will start to develop those browning spots in them, or they'll brown at the ends if they're not getting enough water as a result of underwatering. And the fix for that is to figure out a watering schedule for your plant. Essentially, make sure your plant gets a deep watering first and foremost. If it's been underwatered, and you can tell because you poke your finger in it and the soil is dry. And then get into the habit of poking your finger in the soil every once in a while and seeing what the plant is doing. That will give you an idea of when the soil is dried out, and you really only want to go about an inch or so down towards the root ball, see how the soil feels, and then again give it a deep watering, and that will hopefully give your plant a chance to recover, assuming that the roots are still in good condition. The other possibility is something like we have on this poplar right here, which is not looking great. I put this into a previous video, and at first it looked like it was doing really good, but now you can see it's actually doing kind of mediocre. So if I can get this to Focus on that. Yeah, you can see all the dried dieback. It's still alive. It's doing its best. But I took this out of the bigger pot that I had it in. I had it in a much bigger pot. And that bigger pot was keeping a lot of moisture in there, and I got very concerned. So I put it into this smaller pot so I could better control how much water was in the pot. And control what the roots were getting exposed to, because I didn't know if I had root rot or weak roots. And having examined it, this plant has very weak roots. The roots are barely able to really sustain these leaves. Again, it got over ambitious with its leaves. It's still photosynthesizing through the trunk. The trunk is still alive. It's nice and green in here. But I need to make sure that the roots are gonna maintain. And my fear is root rot. And that oftentimes happens from overwatering. And so I want to be very careful about not overwatering this plant, which is why I have it in this small container where I can keep a close eye on it. So what is root rot? Root rot usually happens when a plant gets overwatered. It winds up sitting in kind of boggy conditions, and it basically starts to deteriorate. There is supposed to be a kind of a gas exchange with the roots, both oxygen and carbon dioxide, and the roots are supposed to dry out a certain amount. And if they are in a boggy environment, they're not going to survive very well, any more so than you would if you were just kept in a bathtub all the time. A while in the bathtub's okay, but living your life in the bathtub, not a great plan. Unless you're the Venus flytraps, in which case, go nuts. Basically what happens is the roots start to decay. They can't, they stop doing their job. They stop bringing moisture up because they're dead. Oftentimes you can wind up with a bacterial or fungal infection inside that area. You'll get anaerobic bacteria just going hog wild in there and choking out the roots and causing further problems. And if that is the case, if you suspect that you have root rot, you may have to do a total repot on your plant. And that can be tricky. But it's kind of a drastic move depending on the time of the year. And under those circumstances, you then have to eliminate all the soil that you're currently using, replace all the soil, clean the roots off, and make sure that it's in healthy conditions. But those are really the key situations that you want to watch out for. And one last thing that can cause leaf browning on your plants is an overgrown root system. This is sometimes called root bound or pot bound. Either one of those can cause water to fail to penetrate down into the roots. The roots can't take up enough water, even though there's a lot of them. Things kind of get stuck at the top of the root ball, and therefore water doesn't make it up to the leaves as much as the plant needs. And that can lead to root browning as well. And the solution for that is either up-potting your plant, moving into a larger pot so that the roots can expand and more water can get around the root ball, or doing a root pruning where you cut back some of the roots on the plant, thereby allowing new growth to get in there and getting some space in there to get some more water into the root system. And that's usually what browning leaves are telling you. Is again, there's an imbalance between the way the roots are functioning and what the roots are able to sustain in the leaves. It may be really drastic. It may be next to nothing, and it may just require some patience in order to kind of figure out what exactly is going on. You want to treat your plant carefully. You want to make sure that it isn't overly saturated with water. You want to make sure that it is getting the right amount of water. And sometimes moving it into a less stressful area, someplace less sunny. This corner over here of my alley doesn't get as much sunlight. It stays a little bit cooler. Doesn't get the wind whipping through it quite so badly. And so this is kind of it's a little shadier. So this is kind of my recovering plants area. So there we go. And not all my plants make it. I have a couple of plants that didn't do so great. Many of these poplars that I planted did not survive. I'm down to maybe 3 of them from the original 7 that I had potted. So that just happens. Sometimes your plant just doesn't make it, and unfortunately, by the time you catch the problem, it may already be too late. My poor mother has been struggling with an orchid that has been limping along for quite some time. And orchids are also one of those really tricky plants. They can have died a long time ago, and it takes the leaves forever to catch up. Many of these plants have the same basic problems, but with a little bit of care and a little bit of luck, you can get pretty lucky. Like for example, I showed this off in one of my previous videos. This was just a dead cut off stump. It was literally no roots on this thing. This was all just one giant root. We can tell this lovely greenery on here. It's all brightly colored. It's pushing out lots of greenery, and that tells me that somewhere down in here there is roots. And the science part of me desperately wants to see what those roots look like, but I'm leaving it alone. I'm just letting it sit and trying to keep it as healthy as I possibly can. There's nothing in here other than dirt and a stick, and I'm getting elms. But elms are good at this. Like, this is a robust plant. You know, if you have something really picky, it may be a different situation entirely. But there you go. That is the short version of what causes brown leaves, what to watch out for. Knowing your plant is one of the key things. If you have any other questions, please feel free to ask. I'm happy to answer questions for anybody. If you have any other requests or anything you'd like to see in the video, I'm happy to help you guys out with those as well. As always, please hit the subscribe button if you haven't done so already, and have yourselves a wonderful day.